Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 50 States Highpointing Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and the Highpointer we're speaking with today is Kelby from Washington. Kelby, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lauren. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited about this.
Yes.
So you're calling from Washington, but you're from Mississippi. And for the listeners who don't know, you have completed all 50 state high points, and you don't just high point, but you're also a rock climber and you're an avid outdoorsman. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know the listeners are as well. So let's just get right into it. Now, can you tell everyone how you got started in the outdoors and what made you want to start high pointing?
Yes. First, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to share the story about 50 high pointing, as it's been a big part of my life. But I got started in the outdoors in a summer camp that I attended. It was called Alpine Summer Camp in Mentone, Alabama. I attended that summer camp 6 years in a row, starting at age 10. It was a month long, and we were introduced to kayaking and canoeing and swimming and hiking and archery and, mountain climbing and things of that nature. And that sort of kicked it off for me to be in the outdoors, having grown up down on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi where there weren't many mountains where I grew up.
Yeah. So. That's a really interesting program because it not only exposes you to the outdoors, but I'm sure you learned a lot of other lessons there as well, as far as survival skills, wilderness skills, autonomy in the outdoors and things like that.
Absolutely. Certainly, everything is in that 10 to 15 or 16-year-old range is discovery. So it was full-on discovery and exploration and finding out who I am and what I'm capable of and things of that nature. So, which carried on throughout the rest of my life.
Wow. So was your first state high point Mississippi?
Mississippi was actually my very last state high point. I think I shared with you before, but when I initially inquired about the High Point organization, the High Pointers, I should say, it told about which were people's final states to finish on. And as you might imagine, people finished on a lot of the big ones, Denali or Hawaii, because they could make it a vacation, or maybe Rainier or Wyoming because they're big and maybe they had failed attempts on the first or second go around. So in that list was Mississippi. No one had ever finished with Mississippi. So I made it my goal to finish with Mississippi, and that's what in fact happened in August of last year.
You mentioned that sometimes people want to finish with something that's very significant to them, or logistically it kind of works out like that. Like you mentioned Denali or Hawaii or something like that. So was Mississippi significant for you just because of growing up there?
It was. I had a wonderful childhood, and I actually did it with my mom. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Oh, cool.
Final high point with my mom, and it was exciting for her. I got to spend some quality time with her, driving from basically the bottom of the state to the top of the state, and it was a thrill for her to have done a high point. Although we did Florida the year before, which is also not far from where I grew up. So she got in 2 of them, so I'm proud of her.
Good,
but it was significant in that it's where I grew up, and like I said, I had previously researched that no one had ever finished with Mississippi. In fact, I had previously mentioned to you as well that I would be curious if any other Mississippian had ever done it. I'd maybe challenge the listeners out there to do some research and find out if I'm in fact the first and or only Mississippian to have ever completed the 50 state high points. I'd be curious to know that. I can't find any records of that indicate who has finished in any particular state where they are from. I couldn't find that information, but it was significant for me in that regards too. So
you're right. And that would be really fun information to know. So if any of the listeners know of anyone from Mississippi who finished all the 50 high points or who finished in Mississippi, leave a comment or send me an email and we'll get that information to Kelby. And if you don't, then maybe Kelby, you're the first.
Super cool.
Yeah, that's fun. So, what was your first state high point and how old were you?
So my first state high point was in 1997, and so I was 27. It was Colorado. I was in dental school. I'm a dentist, and in fact, I'm a periodontist. And I would go to Colorado in the summers to visit some very close friends and family, and I'd spend my summers between some semesters out in Colorado. So I just happened to be out there, and I just happened to get invited to go climb Mount Albert in Colorado, out by Leadville, and so started the process. That was in 1997. My second one, although, wasn't until 2001. So there was a little span there. I didn't know about high pointing then. In fact, I didn't know about high pointing until many years later. I discovered, met someone on the trail and had told him I did Mount Albert, Mount Rainier, Mount Whitney, and they said, "Well, why don't you do all 50?" And I said, I don't know anything about that. Is there such a thing?" And so they sort of shared with me about that. So it was a trail angel, I suppose, that I ran into that that sort of got me started. I don't know who it was or exactly even when it was.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you were just going for big peaks out west, and then you thought, well, I'll finish this list.
Yeah. So maybe gave me something to do. And it was super coincidental.
You had training in rock climbing, mountain climbing, wilderness survival from your camp in Alabama. And then I'm assuming that just continued? Or did you go on any guided summits or anything like that?
So for many years, I just sort of learned the old school way, which is finding mentors. I think that's something that's often overlooked these days. That you find a mentor or mentors that sort of show you the ropes, literally, and keep you safe and instill good habits in you, and really forward the progress of your abilities and interests, as well as continue their abilities and interests as well. But I did do some guided trips through the 50 high points. I have done some guided trips otherwise on other mountains and other locations and other peaks. I did, in fact, have a guide for Mount Rainier. It was Win Whitaker. It was one of the Whitaker sons. So that was
Really?
Sort of a treat to have been guided by one of the great mountaineers' sons in this country. So that was rather a unique experience. He's definitely a very kind individual, and I enjoyed spending time on the mountain with he and his crew. We had perfect weather, perfect summit. It was a little late in the year, so the crevasses had opened up, but we managed like everyone else does, and it was a successful endeavor. First go.
So how many people were on your team there summiting Rainier?
Gosh, that's a good question. That was 2001. I think we had a team of 6, and I believe two, a husband-wife, didn't summit. I don't recall their name. As I said, that was some years ago, but they stopped around 13-ish thousand feet. And they hunkered down until we went up and summited, and we got them on the way down. So I think maybe the other 4 clients summited, and the 2, I think one of the guides, or maybe both of the guides, I don't remember.
So did you do it in 1 day, 2 days, 3?
We did it 2 days. So we went up, stayed the night, and then got an alpine start, probably midnight-ish, 12:30-ish. Summited, came down, gathered our things, and went all the way back down. So it was 2 days. As I recall, it wasn't too bad. I think I remember getting some sore feet towards the end of the descent. It was a big day up and down for me at that point in my mountaineering career. So we've all had feet problems. So
yeah, that's a long day, the summit day.
Yeah, for sure. No question about it.
So then the next big mountain after Rainier was Whitney.
That's correct. So Whitney was a winter ascent. We sort of thought we would sidetrack um, the permit process and do it in
Mm-hmm.
November. So we were fairly still inexperienced at that point in our mountaineering careers, and we actually decided to do it in the latter part of November, which was interesting because we did end up having some snow to contend with, not only on the ground, but it snowed sort of during our ascent as well. But all turned out well, and it was a fantastic summit. It ended up clearing up when we
Yeah.
got to the top, and made for nice photos for sure.
Wow. Did you do the Mountaineers route?
We did not on that trip. We did just the standard ascent route up to the ridge and then across the ridge. So,
Okay, in one day?
well, we went up and stayed one night, summited the next day, came down, stayed at our high camp, and then came down. So it was basically 3 days for that.
Yeah.
Again,
Wow.
inexperience.
Well, you figured it out.
Could easily been done in 2 days.
You know what? I did the Mountaineers route. I tried it twice. The first time, weather was bad. The second time, I think we did 3 days. It could have been two, but it was so nice up there, just watching the sunrise and sunset. I think we were from like Upper Boy Scout Lake, just camping and hanging out. I'm like, this is beautiful. Like, I don't want to go back down. Let's just stay here another day.
That's a that's
It
a
really,
that's a spectacular range at Sierras.
it
No
is. Yeah,
question.
and those alpine lakes are so beautiful.
I've done big chunks of the Pacific Crest Trail through that section right
Wow.
there, so it's a spectacular wilderness area.
When did you do Denali? Was it towards the end of your high pointing, or was this when you were knocking off all the big peaks?
So Denali was in 2019, and I finished
Okay.
in 2022 last year, as I mentioned. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Denali was in 19, and it was a life experience. Anybody
Yeah.
that's been there will likely say the same thing. Yeah, we
Yeah.
were on the mountain for 21 days, so it was a long time. But no, I did. It's funny you asked that, kind of the timing of things. I think Denali was number 12 for me in 2019, and then I did the rest of them from 2019 to 2022. So I got a lot done in those 3 years.
You
um,
did.
so
So, did you use a guide on Denali?
I did use a guide on Denali. Mike
Okay.
Walter was our lead guide on Denali, and it was his 16th or 17th summit. I think
Okay.
it might have put him in the lead for most summits with RMI. He was with RMI as well.
Okay.
I don't know that for sure, but I think he's probably up there. I think he might have more summits than any of the other guides for RMI. But yeah, Mike's a good
Yeah.
guy. Fantastic. Mike lives in Colorado.
Yeah. It's always interesting when you ask the guide, how many times have you done this? And they tell you, and you're like, oh my gosh. Because, for me on Rainier, when I asked my guide how many times she had summited, I think she said that summer was like, or our trip was going to be her 56th summit.
Wow.
And I was like kind of tired, it was day two, and I'm like, 56. Oh my gosh, how do you do this? But it also gives you a lot of confidence in the person taking you up. You feel a lot safer. And it made me relax a little more, going, okay, she's done this 56 times. I'll be good as long as I just pull my weight.
Absolutely. Yeah, I felt the same way about Mike. I mean, just a world of experience and a world of confidence, and yeah, it was wonderful to be in such company.
You're right. Yeah. So 21 days, I know those guided trips, they set aside 21 days, and some are, you just wait for weather. Was there a lot of that?
That's exactly what happened to us. I think we were at
Okay.
14,000 feet for 6 or 7 days waiting for a weather window. So we could go to
Wow.
17 and then push on to the summit. So, in fact, the weather window we finally did get was even still questionable, but we were running out of time, and we said it's sort of now or never. So we pressed on and went to 17, and things cleared up. And the next day we went to the summit and came back to 17. So yeah, it was wonderful. The weather held out for those 3 days that we needed.
That's perfect. So this is something that not a lot of people talk about, but I do want listeners to know, and also I want to know, what do you do on those weather days? Do you just stay in the tent and shovel out the snow around the tent that builds up, or what are you doing? Are you out training? What do you do to fill the time?
You do anything you can to fill the time, but we didn't have a lot of snow accumulation during those 6 or 7 days. It was just wind. And the potential for threatening weather that never really came to fruition, as a matter of fact. But, you read a lot of books, you walk around camp and meet a lot of people, and, you go to the ranger station, you take hikes down to, as far as your guides are comfortable letting you go down the mountain.
Okay.
Try and stay occupied. And those sorts of things. Try and stay in sort of a routine and not just sit there and deteriorate. So your fitness level and that sort of thing. But you do what you can. Lots of people in that similar situation. You do what you can and you hope for the best.
Right. So was there any moment during your Denali climb where you thought, I don't know if this is going to happen, they're going to turn us around, or I might not make it?
Not really. Like I said, it was pretty well orchestrated, and the only question was, personally, whether I could endure it and see it through. Mm-hmm. The real moment of truth came for me, kind of the final 500 or 600 feet. It was actually a very crowded day, and because everybody had been waiting for the same weather window, there were probably 90 to 100 people that summited on the same day that we did.
Wow.
So it was a slight bit crowded up there, and it was kind of slow going. So you were exposed a lot and out, and I think we had 35 below on summit day, and there was 10 or 50 mile an hour winds, so I think it made it probably close to 50 below. So just being out in that and kind of moving slowly, waiting for other parties, it was challenging. And for me, that was the most challenging part, going at someone else's pace. Everyone has their own pace. And when you're on a rope team, you're dictated by what pace you can go. And that was sort of the hardest thing for me. I wanted to, oftentimes, go faster or slower, and sort of accommodating the pace of the group was a very challenging thing for me in particular.
Would you say that the group did they arrive trained, or in your opinion?
Absolutely. We had a fantastic crew, wonderful crew. So, everybody showed up with a good mindset and very well trained for sure.
That's good. Yeah. So would you ever do Denali again?
I will not do Denali again. No.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew it, and I just had to make sure I was right.
What does it say in the Freedom of the Hills? The mountaineering book? It says mountaineering is the art of suffering. And there's a lot of suffering that goes on that mountain. And I don't have any interest in doing it again. I had wanted to do the Cassine route at some point.
Okay.
And I don't know. I guess I might consider it, but it's certainly there's a lot of suffering that goes on up there.
Yeah. Well, the only people that I've talked to who have been on Denali that say they would do it again are the people who didn't summit and they just want to summit.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I've read accounts.
But everyone,
people that went back 2 or 3 or 4 times because they didn't summit, and I even said one day, I said, if I don't summit, there's no way I'm coming back. I said that on the expedition.
Really?
Yeah, for sure. Which if you didn't summit and you came down and you had a chance to rationalize it and think about it, I probably would have gone back because it meant a lot to me to summit the 50 high points. But it was in the moment. I would have probably not gone back, but now I definitely won't go back.
I had a guide on Rainier tell me that mountaineers have the worst memory because they'll say things, they'll promise themselves things that they'll never do again. And then it's like they forgot it and then they do those things again.
Absolutely.
And she said that after, I think it was like day 2. So I went with IMG and we spent day 2 at Ingraham Flats and we were doing some training. And people were coming down from the summit that morning and they were just kind of in pain and just, oh, I'm never doing that again. Oh, I can't wait to get all the way down. Oh, I can't wait to eat, all these things. And I remember, I think, I must have said it out loud, like, oh, I can't believe they're complaining. Like they just summited Mount Rainier. That is so cool. And my guide would go, oh, just wait. And I think I was the same way on the way down. I might not have been vocal about it, but I was definitely thinking that.
Absolutely. So yeah, you're right. So, short-term memory.
Well, I mean, it's cool that you were able to summit on your first trip because I know people that have had to go back 3 times. Of course, they don't have to, but they choose to go back up to 3 times, sometimes even more. And I think the worst part of it is when you're on a team where maybe the people aren't trained to the level they should be. And you pay all this money to get a guide and go through the permit system and get out there. And there's so many logistics involved, even with you getting out to Talkeetna, and to have a team there that might not be prepared to take their own weight plus more up the mountain could be frustrating. But it's good that you didn't have that experience.
Yeah, you think about those things when you're preparing for it and arriving for it and meeting the group for the first time. And I can't even imagine that. That would be tremendously frustrating. But you mentioned one thing about people having to repeat attempts at mountains. That only happened to me one time in this whole entire endeavor. Mount Hood. So Mount Hood, we tried to do it one year, and it was just horrendous whiteout conditions, and the temperatures actually were too warm, so things were falling off the mountain, and ended up coming back the following year and completing it with no problems, perfect weather and perfect sunny day. But it only happened one time in all of my 50, so I feel tremendously fortunate in that regard because it's one of those things where you can't control it. It almost happened in Arizona. In the spring we went, and there was really, really high winds. And I guess people that live in Arizona can appreciate this, but I guess they have these micro bursts, which I hadn't heard of. But I guess these micro bursts can produce some very powerful winds. And I still believe that was the windiest conditions I've ever been in on a mountain. It literally would blow you over. And there were people coming down that didn't make it to the summit, and they said, "Oh, there's no way you can do it." And I'm like, "Well, I came all the way down here. I'm sure going to do it." That's sort of.
They don't know how far you traveled.
That sort of endured. We drove all the way from Washington down there. It was during COVID, so for something to do, to just get out of town. And the winds were horrendous. But I guess as it so happens, these microbursts come in and move through, somewhat rapidly, but it happened to be right in the middle of it. But it was amazing winds, the most amazing winds I've ever experienced on a mountain to date.
That's incredible. So I live in Arizona, but I'm about 7 hours south of Flagstaff, where Mount Humphreys is, or Humphreys Peak.
Yeah.
So we just get a bunch of dust devils around here. But I've experienced something similar, not at Humphreys Peak, but at the Petrified Forest National Park, which isn't too far away. I mean, it's in northern Arizona somewhat. But I remember just these winds that I've never experienced before. And I did grow up in the Midwest, and like I've been not in a tornado, like in the cyclone, but I've, been outside when there was one that touched down. And it was these winds where if you opened your mouth, the wind would consume all the space in your mouth and you would just be like this. And I couldn't, for that reason, I could only breathe through my nose. It was like you couldn't hear people around you,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it wasn't destructive. It was just powerful. But I wasn't on the state high point that day, thank God.
Yeah, I had that same experience. It creates a shortness of breath for you because you're having to breathe only through your nose. I had that very same experience. Interesting.
Wow. So what were some of your favorite high points outside of the big ones that you've done that we've already heard about?
Yeah, people ask me that often. I think that every one of them was unique. Every trip was unique. I did a lot of these with one same friend. My friend Russell Parker, I'll give a shout out to him. We did a lot of them together, and it was the same thing. It was during COVID, and people were just looking for some opportunity to get the heck out of the house and go do something. So he and I did a bunch of them together, and each and every one was an experience. Sometimes they're not easy to find. Sometimes they are easy to find, but the discovery part was really entertaining, for lack of a better word. But I don't know that I can pinpoint any one favorite. Again, they're all very unique and different. A lot of the ones throughout the country gave me opportunity to go see friends that live in other parts of the country. So I associate going to see them with visiting my friends, and again, they're all very unique as far as that goes. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you're a dentist in Washington State. So how do you find the time to climb? And I understand you did a lot during COVID, so I'm going to assume that maybe your practice was closed for a minute.
Yeah, it was closed for a couple, 2.5 months. So I did do a lot of them during that time.
Yeah.
But, it's find work-life balance. It's not easy. It's important to me. So things that are important to you, you'll make time for them, I suppose is how I look at it, and not make excuses for not doing it. So, and me being the A-type personality I am, once I set a goal, there's sort of no going back.
Yeah.
So it'll consume me until I complete it. That took me forward and kept me motivated.
Yeah. So do you like to climb other peaks in the Cascades living out there?
For sure. Yeah. We have a crew of friends out here that we get out here and climb as often as we can, and spend as much time in the outdoors as we can, and always trying to conquer different peaks that we haven't before. So, we're not short on any mountains around here. There's plenty to choose from. So
You're right.
I have a long list that's still ticking away.
That's awesome. So before we move on to some of your other outdoor endeavors, I don't want to ignore the other high points to the east. So can you talk about some of those high points that you've done along the East Coast? Which ones were most memorable?
Yeah, that's a good question, and people often ask that. I was very impressed with Katahdin, not only the wilderness area, but the mountain itself. It is spectacular. What a beautiful wilderness area, and a historic wilderness area as well. There's lots of climbing there on Katahdin. In fact, I've run into 2 friends that said that's where they initially learned how to rock climb, up at Katahdin.
Wow.
There's lots of outdoor opportunity in that wilderness area and on that mountain. I as well was impressed with the New York State High Point, Mount Marcy. Mount Marcy was no joke.
Everyone says that. Yeah, they weren't expecting it.
It was a rugged trail. It was really rugged.
I
mean, physically it wasn't terribly hard, but just the ruggedness of it was surprising to me. As was Mount Washington, the ruggedness, same thing, sort of in that region. But those 2 sort of stand out for me as being nice wilderness areas and challenging peaks and, wonderful places to spend time.
Yeah. Did you encounter any weather on those peaks?
Neither of those peaks I encountered weather. I had a splitter bluebird day on Mount Marcy in New York. Couldn't have been any more perfect. And then on Katahdin, we had some fog roll in, sort of at the top portion of the mountain, so it obscured the views. But there was some weather in the area, but it never came to be. But that's, I guess, a common thing up there, that weather rolls in the afternoon up there and can make for a treacherous descent. But nope, it ended up being good weather for both of those.
Perfect. So we mentioned, you and I spoke briefly before this interview, and when we were trying to schedule it, we had to schedule around a trip of yours to Black Canyon of the Gunnison, where you're doing some rock climbing. Do I remember that correctly?
That's correct. I leave on Sunday.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So have you been there before? And what route are you? Are you starting like from the bottom of the canyon and climbing up?
We are starting from the bottom of the canyon and climbing up. In fact, we're going to camp on the rim and descend down into the rim and climb out. But I have not climbed there before. I really enjoy going to new climbing areas. That's one of my sort of thrills in life, to go to a new climbing area that I've never climbed, especially a stellar area like the Black Canyon. But I have never been there and never climbed there, and really look forward to it. I'm going to spend 4 days down there next week. So I'm super excited about that. Look forward to it.
And then you also mentioned that you have some first descents in Joshua Tree National Park.
I do have some first descents in Joshua Tree. My good friend Todd Gordon, who I can give a plug for, and I have done lots and lots of first descents down in Joshua Tree. So I've enjoyed that aspect of climbing as well, putting up routes and experiencing the excitement of that, and having other people climb them and telling us, oh, that's a pile of junk, or that's one of the best climbs in Josh, that sort of thing. So it sort of runs the whole gamut.
I have the Best Climbs of Joshua Tree National Park book, which I used my first time going there because it is the closest national park to where I live right now, but it's still, 3 hours away or something like that. And so I wanted, to know the best spots to go to. And so I ended up going to Indian Cove, I think 2 winters ago, or last winter, and got a nice camping spot there and really, really cool routes. So do you have any routes at Indian Cove? Just curious.
I don't believe I do, actually. I know Todd has lots and lots of ones there, but I don't believe I put up any there with him during my time there. Just across the way in the Boy Scout Trail, there's lots of things out in the North Wonderland that were done. He and I did together.
Okay, yeah. Indian Cove is one of the only places in Joshua Tree National Park that doesn't actually have any Joshua trees, but it's still a cool area of the park. So where are the majority of your first descents?
They're kind of all over the park. We enjoyed exploring the entire park. I mean, it's a massive park, as you know. But I wouldn't say they're concentrated in any one area. They're certainly away from the more established areas, that's for sure. And, oftentimes climbers don't want to hike out 45 minutes or an hour or more to get to some climbs or some routes, especially if there's only a handful out there. So we would spend time, trying to get 4 or 5 or 6 routes in one particular area, which would encourage people to hike out to these outlying areas and do these new routes. But I wouldn't say they're concentrated in any one particular area.
Okay. And the best time to go to Joshua Tree is in the winter. I mean, right now it's a little hot. This is the Mojave Desert that we're talking about. So you're not going to find a lot of climbers there. And you certainly wouldn't want to do a 45-minute hike in right now. But if it's like winter, that sounds nice to
Oh,
do
yeah,
a long hike in and just kind of set up and go climbing.
absolutely. Especially if it's south facing and sunny. I mean, even in
Yeah.
the winter, it'll be, mostly pleasant if the wind's not blowing in those areas. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, Joshua Tree's holds a special place in my heart for
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
times I've spent out there. And um, it's funny. The locals know there's a club out there. If you do 1,000 climbs, you become a local. And it's funny, I used to joke with friends out there that I've probably done more new routes out there than established routes.
Really?
But I'm not quite at 1,000, but I'm getting there. I'm approaching it. So,
Okay.
mm,
So where I stayed in Indian Cove, that's near a town called 29 Palms, right? I think
correct. That's
29 Palms,
correct.
California.
Yeah.
And that's also home to a Marine base. You mentioned in our conversation earlier that you are a Navy vet. Thank you for your service, by the way. Is that what brought you out to that part of California?
It is. That was my first duty station. So I was a
Hmm.
new Navy dentist, and I got stationed out in California. And I sold it to my wife at the time as, oh, it's right by Palm Springs. You'll love it. And I knew Joshua
Oops.
Tree was there, and I knew I would really enjoy the climbing and the hiking and the outdoors opportunities that it
Yeah,
presented out there. And it ended up, as you know, living in the desert. The desert is a wonderful place. I
it's
saw
cool.
some amazing sunrises and even more amazing sunsets. So I
Hmm.
truly enjoyed my time in the desert, and try and still get down there as often as I can.
Yeah, you're right. It's a really brilliant landscape. And I'm a veteran myself. I was never in the Marines, I was in the Army. But when I talk to other service members who served in Marines or the Navy, and you bring up 29 Palms, and it's just this like, oh, that is the worst place ever. You don't want to be stationed there. But I think it's what you make of it. You can say that about a lot of different Army towns, Marine, whatever, wherever there's a base.
Sure.
But being stationed next to Joshua Tree and in the landscape. I mean, just when you look around and you can see the snow-capped mountains sometimes on a clear day. There's so much to do and it's so beautiful. It really is what you make of it. If you're not an outdoor person, though, I think 29 Palms could be pretty
I,
miserable.
I have a funny story for you. I saw a patient there who was in 29 Palms when I was living there and working there, and he was somewhat of a historian of the base. And I suppose this story is true. He said it used to be an Army base. It used to be a flight training facility for the Army, and the Army
Wow.
deemed it uninhabitable, and the Marine Corps bought it. So he tells me that's a true
Look at that.
story. So somebody out there that maybe is more privy to that information can verify that. But that was a story I heard.
That is really interesting. Well, they did well with it.
Absolutely.
Some people say that about the town that I'm in Yuma, Arizona. I'm out here, because my husband is in the Army and he's stationed here. And we have found just really fun things to do in the outdoors here. I mean, we're right, there's a mountain range in our backyard, and we found just the best hikes, and I'm going to miss it so much when we leave here. And you're right, there's just nothing like a desert sunset.
It isn't.
You can go anywhere, but it's
Absolutely
just not the same.
not the same at all.
Mhm. So, what other outdoor activities do you do outside of climbing?
So I do some backpacking, of course. There's
Yeah.
a crew here that does lots of backpacking. We do canyoneering. It's become our fall trip. The same crew, we go down to Utah and spend some time canyoneering, which is actually a whole different skill set that we're learning. And
Yeah.
it's a little bit scary to me and to us. But we're learning a little bit at a time and definitely doing things within our abilities as well.
I think
I enjoy hot springing. try and get
Oh,
to hot
I didn't
springs.
know that was a verb. That's so cool.
Hot springing in the Northwest, especially in Idaho. Idaho has more than any other state, I believe. And I've been
Okay.
to probably 90 or 95 hot springs over in Idaho and sort of
Oh
ticking
my
that
God.
list off too. So that's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. Idaho is one of my favorite places.
Yeah.
And I've really gotten out into the far reaches of some of these backcountry areas in Idaho and experienced these hot springs and these wilderness areas. And man, it's amazing. I
Wow.
truly enjoy that. So,
Have you seen the hot springs in Arkansas
I
in the
have been to
town?
Hot Springs, Arkansas. Yes.
Yeah. How is
Yeah.
it?
It's developed, right?
Okay.
It's a developed
Mhm.
hot springs. So, yeah, it's wonderful. I can't say I've been to a hot springs yet that I didn't like.
Yeah.
So,
Well, going back to canyoneering, when you talk about that, I think the thing that pops up in maybe the uninformed listener's mind is the movie about the guy who gets caught in the slot canyon and has to amputate his arm.
sure, Aaron
Can you?
Ralston. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Of course, yeah. I think we've all seen that movie with James Franco, and it's really an incredible story.
yeah.
Um, and I think he appears in the end of the movie with
He
his
does.
family or something like that. It was very special.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about what canyoneering is?
Well, let's see. You're cold and wet and scared a lot.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
Hmm.
So yeah, instead of climbing up a mountain, you actually climb down. So you descend into the canyon and you follow the water course through the canyon.
Hmm.
Sometimes there's water, sometimes there isn't. But the things that we do that we enjoy most do have water. Sometimes it requires swimming. So oftentimes we were wearing wetsuits through vast portions of the descent. And sometimes we're taking it on, putting it up, taking it off, putting it on, taking it off, sort of thing. But they require rappelling down into some of these areas,
Sure.
which is interesting because it's extremely committing. Once you get down into this canyon, there's basically no going back. So it's a scary
Wow.
thing, and you really have to be aware of the weather in the area. Other listeners that do canyoneering know this. Weather can be 10 or 15 or 20 miles away and create flash flooding in the canyon you're in because it's
Yeah.
a water course or part of that tributary. So it's a fun and scary thing at the same time, but yeah, we've really sort of taken a liking to it and gotten into it with zest these last few years and trying to get better.
Wow. That's so interesting. I've obviously been to the Grand Canyon National Park. I live in Arizona, nowhere near the Grand Canyon though. But there's this shirt that I've seen people wear. And we all know the quote by Ed Viesturs of getting to the top is optional, but getting back down is mandatory. People who go down into the Grand Canyon and come back out can get this shirt that says getting down is optional, getting back up is mandatory. So the opposite of a mountain, really.
I haven't seen that shirt. That's classic. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love
Have
it.
you done the rim to rim
I
or
have
have
not
you
done the rim to
been
rim.
down
No,
there?
I have not.
It's crowded. It's crowded.
Yeah.
I haven't done it either, but I, follow a bunch of social media pages about permits and stuff like that. And the Phantom Ranch camp is always booked. I've tried so many times to
It's
get
on the
that
life
spot.
list.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the best way to do it is just to finish in a day and not camp
Yeah,
down there because it's so crowded.
yeah. Isn't there a race that is done from rim to rim? A foot
Yeah,
race?
there is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hmm.
Sign up for that. Maybe we'll both sign up for
Yeah,
that.
you're right. And then logistically, I think another good thing to do is go rim to rim so that you don't have to get the ride back because it's actually really far.
Yeah, it is really far. Absolutely. No
Yeah.
question. I bet this is a common theme. I don't know if it's ever come across your questioning or people's interviews, but I
Mhm.
tallied it up and I did 26 of them solo. So by myself, not with any friends or
Okay.
not with any
Yeah.
other help or anything. And part of this experience is exploration and self-discovery, and I think that was a big part of the 50 high point thing for me too. Just doing a lot of these solo and wondering if I could do it, and after doing it, gaining some confidence from that, and continuing to do others solo. They're obviously that I eat, not too challenging ones. I don't want to say easy, but a lot of not too challenging ones. But some of them are, and I did a lot of the more challenging ones by myself, and that was a super fun experience for me. To have done it. And I bet, as I said, this is a common theme amongst a lot of the 50 high pointers, that they did them by themselves.
It is. And I think you found a good balance. You did a little over half alone, which means you did the other, mostly half with the team or something. And, some people set out to do all the 50 high points with their son or daughter, or some people set out to do all the 50 high points with their spouse, and that's their thing. Other people really just find their stride along the way, and they have a similar story, like, I did this one on my own, did this one with a friend, and each setting is unique. And when I ask about memorable moments, they'll say, that was really cool doing it with this friend or this other person in my life, and I'll never forget that moment that we shared. And then on the other hand, the ones that they've done solo, it's like exactly what you said. This helped me gain a lot of confidence in my skills, and you develop autonomy when you're by yourself, because you have to. And of course you already had that probably, but I think that's a good balance, is doing half alone and half with other people.
So I collect quotes in preparation for this. I read a quote, and I was like, I should include this. This was a really meaningful one to me. And it's out of this book. It's called Way Out There by Robert Harris, who was a big trekker. He trekked all over the world, but it's a quote it's a prefacing the first chapter, and it says, "What drives explorers has been endlessly debated, but I think the answer is actually quite simple and obvious. There is nothing that compares with being there wherever there is." So I thought that's so true. That was a really meaningful quote to me, that just being in these settings and taking it in was magical for me, and that's what kept me going throughout all these high points. Was everyone was magic and unique, and they all were important to me, and the discovery part was amazing, and seeing this country was amazing. I got to see some wilderness areas that I otherwise probably wouldn't have visited, and some of these I'll definitely go back to revisit in the years to come. But I think you had asked me also, what's next? And that's a very common question, okay, I'm finished with the 50, what's next? And I think I had mentioned to you the ultra list. There's a list of ultra peaks. There's 57 or 8 of those peaks. And since you and I spoke, she seems, my friend that has encouraged me to do these 57 ultra peaks, has thought there's no one that has completed those. So I don't know. I don't know whether that is in fact true or not, but she seems to believe that no one has completed it. So if the listeners out there know who has completed the ultra peak list, I'd be curious to know that.
So can you tell the listeners what is an ultra peak?
So my understanding is an ultra peak is a peak with 5,000 feet of prominence or more. So it may not be where you necessarily start the hike, but the mountain itself has a profile of 5,000 feet of prominence or greater. So they're an interesting collection of peaks, as a matter of fact, too, because a lot of them are not often climbed, and there's very little information on them, and probably don't see many summits. So they're well off the beaten path, which is sort of inspiring to me, and something that I would really enjoy. I really enjoy being off the beaten path and doing things that are more adventurous rather than less adventurous. So I think
certainly less crowded peaks, I'm sure. And these prominent peaks. Now we're talking about the distance from the base of the mountain to the summit, more or less.
Correct.
I know I might not be geographically accurate if you were to ask an expert, but that's basically what it is. So what are some examples of ultra peaks? Are there any that people wouldn't recognize?
Sure. I mean, in effect, a lot of them are 50 high points.
Okay.
The first 10 I'll read you. Mount Rainier, Mount Whitney, Mount Shasta, Mount Albert, Mount Baker, which is here in Washington, San Jacinto and San Gorgonio, which are down in California,
oh, yeah,
Palm
in California.
Springs. Those have tons of prominence, 8,000 feet of prominence. Charleston Peak in Nevada, Mount Adams here in Washington, Mount Olympus here in Washington, which I'm doing this summer. So those are just, some of the examples, and, range from 13,000 feet to roughly 8,000 feet in prominence. So those are some of the most prominent peaks in the lower 48. Yeah, we need to clarify that. We're not talking about the entire 50 states, just in the lower 48 states is what this list represents. But again, I've done probably 12 or 14 of these already, so I have a good head start, I think, because a lot of them I've done on my own or they're high points. So I look forward to starting to tick that list off.
That's fun. I loved San Gorgonio in the San Bernardino wilderness. I camped out there, and I'm not surprised that it's a prominent point because, it does just rise out of the desert, kind of. And San Gorgonio is actually the Southern California high point. So not a state high point, but a regional one for sure. And it's just such a beautiful wilderness area. So you can actually, I reserved a camping spot on the summit of it, which is like 11,000 feet or something. Yes. And then it was just a little too windy. So I stayed at the camping spot right beneath it. And I just remember the ranger was so cool. And he just helped me out a lot to, find a spot last minute. And just, again, it's like those moments that you remember in these wild places, not necessarily exactly what you were doing. But as I mentioned at Whitney, I'm like, waking up on the mountain and watching the sunrise was just something that I'll never forget. And I might forget the technicalities of the climb, same with Rainier and same with some other hikes that I've done. But there are just these little snippets that I'm just like, I will never get that back, and you can't buy that. Yeah. And that was San Gorgonio for me, definitely, when I camped up there. So I would recommend when you go out there if you can camp on the summit, like try that, if it's not too windy, because you get a nice view of the Palm Springs and, the city below.
Super cool. But I had bear encounters. I've been out there twice to the Gorgonio area. But
you did?
I had bear encounters both times I was out there.
Okay. Before I went, I bought a bear canister because I wasn't sure if there was bear activity there, but I thought, well, it's California. They put a bear on their flag. Maybe I should just be ready. And I didn't see any, but I was always very scared. And I even put like bear spray on a holster and everything. I didn't see one though.
Yeah, they're out there.
What are some of your favorite outdoor adventure books, podcasts, or documentaries?
Ooh, you should have prepared me for that question.
Well, I think that listeners like this question too, but I have to say it's really for me because I'm always looking for another book to read.
One of my favorite podcasts is Slide. It's the Avalanche informational podcast. I'm very conservative when I go out and avalanche terrain, and I'm always trying to learn as much as possible as I can about that to try and be safe. I really don't push the limits or the boundaries with avalanche terrain ever. And so I want to learn as much as I can about that so I can still spend time out in the mountains, even in avalanche terrain, whatever time of year that happens to be. But books, adventure books, was that the question?
Or any form of media, books, documentaries, anything.
Yeah, that's That's mostly what I read is adventure books,
Yeah, me
and
too.
so they all sort of run together. I can't say one's better than the other. There is
Right.
well, there is one. There's a book. I can't remember the author's name. It's called Chasing Peaks. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of
Okay.
it,
I
but
haven't.
basically, this individual, whose name again I can't recall, um, travels part of the year and climbs and works the other part of the year. So he's made it a lifestyle choice to do that. I
Okay.
always thought that was fascinating, that he
Yeah.
had actually chosen, sort of to the detriment of his life. I hope he's not listening. To his marriage and life. I'm not being critical. I love it, but
That's
he
yeah.
had chosen to, spend a vast majority of his life climbing. He would set a list. I'm going to do all the California 14ers. He did all the California 14ers. I'm going to do all 50 state high points. I believe he did do that.
Hmm.
I'm going to do, all the Colorado 14ers. And then he expanded into South America and Canada and Alaska. So it's an
Wow.
interesting book to me because it's so varied. It's all over the country and all over this hemisphere. And, some of our, I can't recall if that he went over to Europe and did any things in Europe, but I think he did. But that was a
Wow.
really inspiring book to me. Because it was just one list after another, after another, after another. So somebody who's dedicated their entire life to that was super
Wow.
cool to me. So,
Chasing Peaks.
Chasing Peaks is what I remember the title
Okay.
being. Yeah,
Okay, cool. I'll
yeah,
keep an eye out for that.
yeah.
So I have to ask, just living in the Cascade Range, do you like Fred Becky's books? Do you read his books? Do you use them as reference?
I do use the Becky
Hmm.
climbing books, and I've done a lot of Becky routes in various parts of the country. There's
Hmm.
obviously he's spent time all over the country and established routes all over the country, and yeah, his routes are usually pretty amazing. Some of them are out of my ability at this point, but yeah, his mountaineering prowess was unheralded. I mean, just unbelievable.
Yeah.
The things he accomplished in his life. Um,
Yeah. Well, I say that because it's one of my favorite documentaries. It's called Dirtbag, The Legend of Fred Becky on Amazon. And that's how I found out about him. And then since then, I ordered some of his books, and he is such a great writer.
he
Because
really,
after watching that documentary, I didn't expect, really profound writing just because of how, I guess, crass he is and how unfiltered he is.
yeah,
But his writing it's great.
yeah, it's
And
true,
it's,
very true. Yeah.
it's, he not only writes well, but it's very informative and specific. And you would think he was a scientist or something.
I ran into
Just
him a
the way
couple of
that
times in Leavenworth climbing. He's not much.
really.
He's not much for conversation, or he wasn't. Um, I guess that was just his nature. But
Hmm.
anyway, it was neat to see him in the outdoors and doing his thing, even at a later age. Was really
Yeah.
neat to see. Um, he was a
Wow.
unique
Well, that's so
individual, no
cool.
question.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like to close out the podcast with just asking the question of how high pointing and also a life in the outdoors has enriched your own life and, your personal life, your professional life. How has it made you a better person?
Um, wow, unbelievable. Everything I do is I reflect on the outdoors. It's just it's my peace. It's my spirituality. It's when I feel closest to any higher being on this earth, and um, it's just the purest form of happiness to me. That's the best way I can put it. To be in the outdoors and to experience some of the things I have and will continue to experience, hopefully,
Hmm.
throughout the rest of my life. But it's just such a good soul enriching thing for me. That's the best way I can put it. And I
Hmm.
continue to seek it, whatever it is, and I continue to feel the energy in being in the outdoors and the joys and happiness and sometimes not joy and not happiness that go along with that, that make you a better person and instill confidence. So it's really enriched my life in those ways.